COVID-19, the new pandemic, the virus that has us all stuck inside, longing for connection, entertainment, comfort, the thing that has us lying awake at night wondering, what now? And all that thinking can lead us into some pretty philosophical realms. Personally, I have been considering the paradoxical nature of the thing that is both keeping us safe and keeping us suppressed. Laws. Laws are written to protect our liberties, but when the policies of our governments feel so suffocating during this pandemic, I begin to wonder, where do we draw the line? How far are we willing to let the government's power grow to keep us safe? In an attempt to tackle this question, I look to Locke's second treatise of government. In section 57, he says,
"The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of created beings capable of laws, where there is no law, there is no freedom. For liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others, which cannot be where there is no law."
This seems straightforward. Laws are created to protect our liberties. Their purpose is not to restrict us. If a state is capable of creating laws, it must be done. No laws equals no freedom. But there are two things to point out here. First of all, Locke very specifically says that the preservation and enlargement of freedom is the end of law. The end is not to abolish or restrain freedom, but could that be the means to the end? Secondly, Locke's definition of freedom comes with a couple caveats. He states that freedom is not, as we are told, a liberty for every man to do what he lists, for who could be free when every other man's humor might domineer over him? But a liberty to dispose and order as he lists his person, actions, possessions, and his whole property within the allowance of those laws under which he is, and therein not to be subject to the arbitrary will of another, but freely follow his own. Here, Locke is warning us that what we might define as freedom is wrong. It's not the authority to do whatever, whenever. It's actually having the security to have control over yourself and your property. Therefore, laws protect individuals against other individuals, as well as any other force that may encroach upon their autonomy. So what does this have to do with COVID-19? In the United States, many of us, for the first time, are experiencing the true power of the government. Across the country, we have curfews, travel bans, large gathering bans, and stay-at-home orders. These things can be scary. Who knew our laws could go so far? But according to Locke, we were born into this system, and since we haven't left it, we have agreed to it. We must trade certain liberties to protect liberty as a whole. However, the end of these laws must be the preservation or expansion of liberties. Is that what's happening here? The power that Locke seemed to be most concerned about at that time was that somebody would come and take our land from us. However, that doesn't encompass everything that we're dealing with right now. So instead, let's look at the economy. With stores closed, students kicked off of campuses, jobs cut, salaries decreased, resources scarce, we look to the government to save the economy. You might think, hey, the government is making us follow all these rules. We can't even go to work. Which might lead you to think, maybe the government should provide us aid, since it is the very force preventing us from working. In the US, that's wishful thinking. Thus far, the government seems to only take action that benefits big businesses. For example, certain businesses have been deemed essential. This is great for the big chain stores, continuing business as usual with a few extra precautions. However, this is detrimental to small businesses. The president signed the CARES Act, which is essentially a loan program for small businesses, but every loan is a risk for a business. It is unclear if CARES will actually save small businesses or just prolong their inevitable closure. In fact, a survey of 1,500 small businesses showed that over 50% of them are expecting to close forever. Meanwhile, revenue for chain stores is growing. Not to mention the stigma surrounding Asians right now that is suffocating Asian-owned restaurants. By the way, Trump, it would help if you stopped calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus.
For the first time in our history, the government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages.
Other places, such as the UK, have promised to pay workers 80% of their salaries while they stay at home. That sounds like a much better deal than the $1,200 stimulus check littered with rules about who can receive one and who can't that Trump is offering us. I can't wait to go buy some toilet paper with that money. Or not. With all of the misinformation and panic surrounding COVID-19, people have been panic buying non-perishables, cleaners, bleach, wipes, masks, gloves, and oh yes, toilet paper. Besides lack of availability, the danger of these high-demand items is price gouging. When the supply stays the same but the demand increases by a lot, the market naturally must raise prices in order to maintain an equilibrium. This often results in sky-high prices. Perhaps laws preventing price gouging may seem unfair to business owners, but in reality, businesses should not be benefiting from a national emergency while they hold the supplies that the people need. Some economists might argue that price gouging is necessary for the distribution of resources. However, this directly impacts the lower socioeconomic class. Price gouging might present an annoying inconvenience to those who can still afford the supplies after the prices are raised, but it can actually be detrimental to the lower classes. Luckily, there are plenty of laws preventing price gouging. Of course, it still happens illegally, but in general, citizens of the United States are safe from huge jumps in prices. This is an example of how laws are created to protect us as individuals from others violating our liberties and quality of life. So instead of price gouging, stores are limiting the quantity of certain items that can be purchased by a single customer. This is a method of distributing resources that benefits society as a whole rather than single businesses. But let me use this time to remind you, toilet paper is still being produced. Please do not go crazy and hoard it because there are people who actually need it. Also, be mindful of what items you're stocking up on. Cheap foods such as boxed macaroni or pre-made meals are often essentials to low-income families. If you look closely, items that can be purchased using food stamps are marked. Try to leave those items for people who truly need it. Another group that is affected by COVID-19 that must be considered is college students. Dear government, please consider forming policies based on the following. Dear professors, please consider all of the following before assigning a bigger workload than you did before COVID-19 and distance learning. Most students employed by their universities are out of a job. Students who held jobs in their college towns might not be close to that location anymore. Students who didn't require a job before COVID-19 might be looking for their first job in order to support their families. And there are some students who rely on campus housing to not be homeless. These students are very suddenly finding themselves out on the streets or couch surfing because they don't have the same eviction protections as people renting apartments do. Also, our free time at home is very often not free. Besides job searching or adjusting to a new job, our families need help around the house. And in many immigrant households such as my own, children are utilized for housework and other tasks to support our parents. There's a lot of extra responsibility there that's not considered by some professors. And a lot of college students have been given the responsibility to go grocery shopping for the family in order to protect family members that might be at a higher risk of getting sick. There are also students who must help take care of family members such as parents, siblings, grandparents, whether it's a COVID-19 situation or something else. Not to mention time differences, lack of face-to-face learning, higher rates of depression and suicide, and difficulty focusing due to household distractions. Highlighted inequalities through lack of in-person, on-campus resources such as writing centers, tutors, office hours, and libraries. Lack of technology, laptops, cameras and microphones for effective online class participation. Lack of Wi-Fi or bandwidth in a household with more than one student or possibly parents working from home. Increased costs for students who have to resort to using cellular data to attend class. And professors. If your students are using green screen backgrounds during class and they're not disrupting anybody, leave them be. Understand that requiring students to show themselves and their background can be uncomfortable because they may not want to reveal their poor living situation. Making students turn off their green screen backgrounds can be very embarrassing and emotionally distressing to those in low-income situations. Then there's the point of privacy. The protection that students receive from laws is lagging due to the quickly evolving situation. For example, there are many features of online classes that students are not made aware of. In Zoom, you can send private messages to other students during class. These messages may be highly personal, or the student may be sending the message privately because they would be too embarrassed to ask the whole class or cause a disruption. However, if a professor decides to download the transcript of a Zoom session at the end of class, those private messages are pulled and compiled into the transcript, readily accessible to the professor. Then, there's attention tracking technology. This feature allows professors to know if a student is paying attention to the screen. If your eyes are not facing the screen, you are susceptible to the technology flagging you down and alerting the professor. And these outrageous features are accompanied by ridiculous new testing requirements by professors. Here are just a few of the examples I've heard from students across the country. At many universities, if there's a test, students are required to point their camera at their test while taking the test, and they can be watched live by their professors. First of all, this is not very considerate at all of students who suffer from test-taking anxiety. Having a camera directly pointed at their work is not helpful and may result in poor performance. I have also heard of professors who require students to have 2 cameras available during tests, one pointed at their face, one pointed at their test or workspace. Again, not great for low-income families. And another feature of online work that students are often not told about is that sites such as Canvas can tell the professor if you have left the testing page during a test. It can also tell the professor what time you last accessed a file, allowing them to check if you had opened any files during a test. In my opinion, even if a student has nothing to hide, these features are terrifying and often untold to the students, which is a total invasion of privacy. As for professors, there is a clear solution to test taking. Make the test open note. If you're worried about cheating and can't do anything to prevent it, simply make the test open note and provide more difficult problems or prompts. And a final note to professors. Please be understanding of students' feelings and how we're coping with the pandemic. Don't be rude to the student who doesn't have their eyes glued to the screen. They might have ADHD. Be understanding if a student is hesitant to participate in online classes. There's extra anxiety associated with these new learning platforms. Understand that we're going through a lot of stress, just like you. Understand that your student probably doesn't want to ask for that extension, but they need it. And to the shameful professors that say stuff like, "You need to show me a death certificate," when a student is asking for support, maybe consider a new profession. And what does any of this have to do with John Locke? Well, because of the pandemic, laws are rapidly changing. The government is rapidly changing. Hungary is the easiest example to point to of how this pandemic is destroying democracies, but that is just because it happened quickly there. We can't sit here and ignore the growing powers and abuses of the government so that we become the next Hungary. This is not to say that we should ignore stay-at-home orders, but this is a warning to not just sit there and accept the invasion of students' privacy, the location tracking of sick individuals, the relentless and violent monitoring by the police, the postponement of elections. Where some people might say that the government is coming up with too many rules, I say it's coming up with too few to protect us from others and the government itself. Locke says that even in a state of nature, there is a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. We need protections for both our health and our liberty. I'm willing to trade some of my liberties by staying indoors, avoiding large gatherings, and participating in physical distancing in the hopes that the government will protect us by requiring this of everybody. I am willing to support laws that protect nurses and doctors, increase the production of medical supplies, prevent hate crimes against Asians, and protect us from instances like this. However, I am not willing to trade my privacy, my voting rights, and the requirement of a warrant to enter my home for an abusive government. Are you? Because as Locke says, if somebody wrongs you,
every man hath a right to punish the offender and be executioner of the law of nature.
This means that sitting back and letting the government do whatever it wants, or letting the president claim that he has a total authority, is an offense to our lives and our liberty. We must utilize the points that Locke makes about the end of laws to preserve and enlarge freedom, especially in these unprecedented times.